my friend.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny.
No problem. So show that full screen. And meanwhile, for anybody that's currently joining right now, this is a session with my buddy Jacek. Thank you very much for staying up late at night to join us, since you're based in Warsaw, Poland. And so me being nice and comfortable here in the Pacific Northwest. So we are currently live on YouTube, so we're waiting for that to go. So we're waiting for LinkedIn, and once we go ahead and show it on the Delta Lake LinkedIn, then we're good to go. So now, just in case, again, you want to know what session you're with Jacek and myself, Denny. We are currently talking to the latest and greatest of Delta Lake. We have a Delta Lake 1.2 tutorial. So give us just a couple more minutes to get ourselves up and running. Meanwhile, whether you're on Zoom or on YouTube or up in LinkedIn, let us know where you're coming from, which city. Jacek already admitted that we already called it Jacek's from Poland. I'm from Seattle, Washington. Hey, why don't you chime in the chat and tell us where you're based out of?
Exactly.
So how are things going, my friend?
Yeah. Man, I'm so stressed. Come
on. You always say you're stressed, but you're not really. Yeah,
so, I know.
Yeah. Oh, we got some great people. We got from Ecuador, India, the Bay Area, from Pune, India, Bangalore, India. This is awesome. Oh, we got somebody from Turin, Italy. That's sweet. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
How's it in Turin, by the way, Rosario? It's got to be gorgeous there right now. Portugal. Woohoo! Always glad to see somebody from Portugal. We got some folks from Lithuania. That's pretty sweet. All right.
Did you just mention Italy? Because
yes.
next week I'm gonna fly to Bari, if I'm not mistaken. My ladies handle it all, so I'll be in Italy. So if Ricardo or whoever is in Italy, the time, you just ping me. We can just chat in person.
There you go. So Jacek's going to be in Italy, Rosario, and they noticed that they're celebrating Eurovision. That's pretty sweet.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the Ukrainian team won, right? If I recall correctly, in Eurovision, right?
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't watch it, but yeah. It was Ukraine that won, the team, but don't know exactly.
All right, well, let's get started right now, just because I figured the people were not here to discuss Eurovision. I mean, as much as that's enjoyable, but
exactly.
Yeah, so hi, everybody. My name is Denny. I'm a developer advocate here at Databricks. Been with the Delta Lake project for quite some time, but instead of listening to my horrible voice, I want to introduce and bring my buddy Jacek here. Great Apache Spark contributor, Delta Lake contributor. So, hey, he's going to go ahead and start this 3-part series on the Delta Lake 1.2 tutorial. Now, some quick house cleaning notes. If you have any questions, by all means, chime in the Q&A section on Zoom or in LinkedIn, and also on YouTube. I will do my best to go ahead and actually answer some of those questions during the as Jacek's presenting. But please, a couple things to note. Number one, we're going to be running this on Databricks Community Edition. The notebooks will be available for you to download. And number two, during the first 30, 40 minutes, please try to keep the questions to the tutorial itself. If you have questions that are outside the tutorial, we still will leave 20 minutes for after the initial portion of the tutorial to answer those questions as well. But we did want to call that out, okay? And so now that I got all that taken care of, without further ado, my buddy Jacek, please go ahead.
Thank you, Danny. Okay, thank you, Danny. Thank you all for joining me today to share my passion and love to Delta Lake, towards Delta Lake, to this open source version with some flavor of Databricks, whatever they offer these days in Community Edition. I'm going to use Azure Databricks for the sake of setting up the stage and making sure that if you are trying to follow me exactly what I'm going to do, just know that that's going to be Azure Database, but I don't expect any differences if you are on a different cloud provider. Anyway, so this is the latest and greatest of Delta Lake, and so I'm going to talk about Delta Lake. I've got 3 hours to talk about it, and from one perspective on this is that it seemed like 3 hours should be just enough to give you a nice intro to Delta Lake. On the other hand, I've been with Delta Lake for so long that it's definitely way longer than 3 hours. So for one, 3 hours should be enough to give you a nice intro to this solution to this project. On the other hand, it might be not enough. Anyway, just keep asking questions. During these 3 hours, you've got me and Danny and other folks who can just chime in and help you get going with Delta Lake. And what is Delta Lake? Just by looking at this intro slide, it's just open source storage layer with ACID transaction for Apache Spark, okay, and other data processing platforms. We'll get to all these details in a sec. Just know that if you need just one sentence to describe Delta Lake, I think that this fits the bill very well, okay? Nice. Okay, so just a little bit about myself. Yeah, I know that I can ruin my presentations just by spending hours speaking about myself, even though this is not the main topic of my presentation. Sorry for this, if it takes too long. So my name is Jacek Laskowski. I'm IT freelancer specializing in Apache Spark, Delta Lake, and Apache Kafka. So whenever you need me, my first question is it something about Spark, Delta Lake, or Kafka? If your answer is no, it's probably the end of our conversation. Sorry about it. That's how my life goes these days. Well, you might be wondering, why is that? Okay, am I not afraid of losing market? Because it might be that my job is no longer necessary for others, for my customers. No, I can see that this is quite the opposite. Even though I've been with Spark for over 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. Well, 10-ish, so to say, maybe 5. Okay, 5. Let's stick to 5. It looks like I keep finding people who are so new to Spark and Delta Lake and Apache Kafka that I wonder, how is it possible that they've been missing it for so long? These people, this project. So anyway, so I also sometimes look at Trino and KSQLDB, these SQL-ish data processing platforms. And contrary to my beliefs back then when I was younger, SQL is not that. And it's, the more I'm with SQL, the more I see fit for, data processing platforms like Spark and Delta Lake. And even though I am and still believe that I'm gonna be hardcore Scala dev, I see potential for SQL, and looks like SQL is again cool kid on the block. Okay, so contact me at Jacek@PL or DM me on Twitter. So this is the Twitter handle. So if you've got any questions about Spark, Delta Lake, and Kafka, just drop me an email. Shoot me a message, and we can start conversation. I usually start this conversation with, did you ask this question, or have you perhaps asked this question on Stack Overflow? So because I believe that this way is the best way to reach out to wider community of Spark, Delta Lake, and Kafka. So yeah, so don't treat it too personal if I respond like this. Just feel free to spark my curiosity about your problems. Okay, so friendly reminder, just like as Danny mentioned, we'll have a Q&A session after me talking and presenting Delta Lake today during this 1-hour session. There is this link, go Delta.io, Delta users. This is the link to Slack channel where you can leave your questions, have a nice conversation or conversations with, Delta users, Delta lovers, and anybody who subscribe to Delta users channel. Just feel free to be welcomed and join the channel and start conversation about what you know or what you miss about Delta Lake. Okay, so Delta Lake. So these are the slides, and yeah, we'll have slides and we'll have some practical demos. I used to, or I tend to present what I love spending my time on for this presentation, it's Delta Lake, using a live coding session format. So, but from time to time, I find slides very helpful because they keep me focused on some kind of agenda. Yeah, so you will see some slides, some notebooks. I'll be switching back and forth between different resources. But don't worry, if you feel that you got lost during me switching between different windows, doing different stuff at the same time, fear not. You will get all the slides, all the notebooks. If not, just drop us an email to Danny, myself, or leave a comment, on LinkedIn, and we'll respond with all the resources you need. But whatever I am gonna say about Delta Lake is my take on what I managed to see through the source code of Delta Lake. So I apologize for not using all the buzzwords that people love, like data lakes or lakehouse architecture, blah blah blah. I'm not good at it. I leave it to Danny and others who are well versed with all these nice cool words. I'm catching up. Okay. In other words, all my data engineering knowledge and wisdom, if I may put it this way, is coming directly from the sources of Apache Spark, Delta Lake, and Kafka, and some other systems, or projects, open source projects. That's one of the many reasons why I love hanging out with these open source projects, because, well, I can learn from them, read these sources as a book, a kind of a book, and these sources teach me, how to think about Delta Lake and others. So, and all this information, the nice looking documentation introduction, is on homepage of Delta Lake, which is https delta.io. So for me, whenever I hear this word Delta, the very first time I learned about Delta Lake back then, 3-4 years ago, ish, it was like, Delta, are they talking about this airlines, or is this some new term? So, but now Delta is only about Delta Lake. So whenever I say Delta, just know that I'm speaking about Delta Lake. So from time to time, I might get mistaken by saying data lake. Whenever I make this mistake, it's that this is just a mistake, and I'm thinking about Delta Lake. Okay, so Delta Lake is an open source transactional storage layer over object stores. And believe me, it took me some time to understand the value proposition of Delta Lake. I remember watching Burak, TD, and others, Michael, these guys who created Delta Lake, the big brains, the smart guys behind Delta Lake project. Sorry if I didn't include others who contributed to this Delta Lake, but the point is that they put this description why they needed Delta Lake. And I remember Michael Armbruster, he mentioned something that they struggled with using Spark or Spark streaming. I think it was about Spark streaming. Using file format data source and writing to object stores and making sure that these writes are consistent. And there was this story about all these cloud providers with cloud object stores being not non-consistent, not perhaps they were atomic, but not all these acid properties. So all this brought them to this concept of, hey, let's create let's create Delta Lake. Okay, so they just extended Apache Spark with a brand new format to bring ACID transactions, time travel, and scalable metadata handling to Apache Spark. That's my understanding what they needed or what they did with Delta Lake, and what's the intention or what's the goal of Delta Lake. So all these three ACID transactions, time travel, and scalable metadata handling features were not and still are not available in pure vanilla Apache Spark. So we needed them for interacting with this inconsistent object stores in cloud providers like Azure, AWS, and GCP. So we needed it to transactionally write data to this large inconsistent object stores, if I may put it this way. Again, if I put something using words that mean something different for you, I apologize. It might be because I didn't study all these topics. I just read about these topics from the source code itself, or in articles by the wise men from Databricks and other projects. Okay, and speaking about Apache Spark and Delta Lake, the nice, cool feature of Delta Lake is that it supports streaming and batch data processing. In other words, for me, from my perspective, when I started exploring Delta Lake, the very first discovery of the day was, hey, what's cool about Delta Lake, since it's just yet another data source of Apache Spark. So for a long time, I couldn't understand the very proposition of Delta Lake, given that it looked like something that I had in Apache Spark already, yet I missed these three main features of Delta Lake, something that I think made Delta Lake so cool. So ACID transactions, again, time travel, and scalable metadata handling. You could do this by yourself without Delta Lake, but it definitely lets you to create something that would resemble Delta Lake in the end. So it's fully compatible with Apache Spark APIs. So again, this is just yet another data source, data format in Apache Spark. So if you know Apache Spark by heart, or you worked with Parquet, with CSV, JSON, or other formats, you should be good to go and just use Delta Lake. So it's especially very important to understand that if you always work with Parquet tables or data sets, Delta Lake is just Parquet data sets with JSON metadata. So as I described in this here, think about Delta Lake as an open source transactional storage layer that uses Parquet data sets, but adds this extra metadata, kind of like Hive Metastore-ish metadata in JSON encoded format, in JSON format. So Delta Lake, using Apache Spark infrastructure, can give you these nice properties like ACID transactions and others. Okay, so let me wrap it up in this nice demo that will show you what exactly it means to use Delta Lake, and show you exactly what I meant by saying that this is just Parquet data sets with extra JSON encoded metadata. So if you are old enough and you worked with, well, old enough might not be a good intro to this. So if you ever worked with a Hive with Hive enabled environments, with Hive Metastore, or some kind of a Metastore where tables were described externally by some external properties, Delta Lake with these JSON encoded files may look very similar. So since I haven't spent enough time with Hive, I came to this big data data processing platforms after Hadoop was considered, especially MapReduce, was considered big no-no because, well, Spark was already available on the market. I joined Spark when it was released as 1.0, if I'm not mistaken. I may have joined it when it was 0.8, but I can't remember it exactly now. So I had no pleasure or pain working with tools before Spark. So I might confuse you if I use something Hive related here during this presentation. I apologize for this. Okay, so what it takes to, so this demo is supposed to show you what it takes to install Delta Lake in your Spark application. Again, we are speaking Spark here. We are Spark lovers, Spark users, at least. We've been using Spark for data processing. And now we want to extend the vocabulary of Spark with these features of Delta Lake. Okay, so we need to install Delta Lake. So this demo is going to show you what it takes to install Delta Lake in your Spark application. Then we are going to create a very first Delta table, review its internals, and then just see what it takes to read and write to a Delta table. It's going to be this table or another one. We can, create as many tables as we want. So we can end up with a couple. And we are going to use Spark SQL and Spark Stream. So if this session stops here, well, if this session stopped here, well, by saying here, I mean after this demo, I'd be very happy because that should show you that using Delta Lake costs you nothing, and especially in environments like Databricks, where they pre-installed Delta Lake. More importantly, they made Delta Lake the default format in Spark, contrary to unlike what you may have found in vanilla Apache Spark installation. So you may get confused or happier just by finding out that Databricks comes with Delta Lake as a pre-installed package and being the default format in your Databricks notebooks. Okay, so I'm gonna switch to Databricks platform. So let me switch to my notebook. And this notebook, Delta Lake, comes from this repo. And by saying this repo, I mean, when you go to, and again, I'm going to provide you with all the links if you need them. So no worries if you miss this or that. That's going to be also, this presentation is going to be recorded, is being recorded. So you should miss no information that I'm sharing during this presentation. So at this URL, github.com/Jacek Laskowski, you can find this Spark Delta Lake workshop repo, where you can find notebooks, a few notebooks that I've been using for my demos. Among them is Delta Lake. And you might get scared seeing PyY as the default, as the extension of this notebook, but fear not. Even though I used PyY as an extension for this notebook, and yes, Python is the default format for this notebook. I used SQL. I used mixture of SQL, Scala, and Python to present the features of Delta Lake in this notebook. And just if you are curious, why didn't you stick to SQL then, since SQL seemed to be highlighted as the vehicle or tool to intro you to Delta Lake? Well, I can do this the default format, but this extension is not going to be SQL. That's at least my understanding. Anyway, again, just to highlight the fact that I'm Scala dev. It's been a while. It took me a while before I converted my feelings to be more friendly towards this platform, this notebook platform. Because I tend to stay away from UIs that hide the real features of what I'm using through this curtain, through this UI based platform. That's why I hang out with tools via the source code. Okay, so Delta Lake. So notebook is in my repo. It's freely available. You can use it for your own learning purposes, or you can just use them, use this or other notebooks to teach others what you learned in this presentation. Okay, so so there are some links to some other learning resources. Among them is my book, something that I've been updating. Every Delta Lake release. So now I'm focusing on Delta Lake 1.2.1. So unless you use 1.2.1 version of Delta Lake, you may find that some features are not available in your version. And that's because, well, you are using the older version. That's, well, you should, in essence, you should upgrade to Delta Lake 1.2.1 immediately or as soon as possible. Why? Because there are some features only available in Delta Lake 1.2, like among them are features like optimize command that's not available in Delta Lake before this 1.2 release, as well as some filtering optimization that I'm gonna discuss later on. Okay, during this 3-hour tutorial session series. Okay, so we'll get to internals in a sec. Okay, so Delta Lake. This section is to guide you to the slides that I have here. So in case you are wondering where you can find these slides, well, you can just find them in the notebook. So all you need to get going with this intro is just open this notebook and you should be good to go. Okay, so intro, overview. So let me start with overview. So what are the features that make Delta Lake so cool, or at least for me and some other people? So Delta Lake is open source. That's one of the cool features that I found in Delta Lake. Other is that it's Apache Spark based. There are features like ACID transactions and time travel that I already mentioned. Okay, and I found this quote very heart touching, if I put it this way. A nice intro to Delta Lake, another intro to Delta Lake. So Delta is a storage format, while Spark is an execution engine. So combining these two together will give you storage and compute platforms platforms. So think about Delta as a storage format, while Spark as this compute platform that enables all the features that the Delta Lake provides. Know that Delta Lake 1.2.1 supports Apache Spark 3.2.0. The latest and greatest of Spark is 3.2.1, but no worries, 3.2.1 should work fine too, because it's just a minor release. Just know that although it's not officially supported via this build.sbt that I provide link to, I've been using Delta Lake 1.2.1 with Apache Spark 3.2.1 just fine in my projects. Okay, so what are the other cool features in Delta Lake? There are tables. So Delta tables are basically Parquet tables, just good old Parquet tables with transactional or transactional log or transaction log. And this is the extra directory that you can find in directory where you store your Delta encoded if I may put it this way, or Delta-owned files. This transactional log makes all the goodies that are available in Delta Lake to Parquet tables. So we all know that Parquet format is nice, columnar format, nice for Apache Spark, analytical workloads. Now we know that we've got something that's even cooler. So consider Delta Lake something like Parquet++, if this analogy to C and C++ is something that you consider good. So all the changes to the state of a Delta table are reflected as actions that are persisted to this transactional log in JSON format. We'll get to it, what it means, okay? Again, I am introducing you to Delta Lake via very low level information. So, and they all come from directly from the source code. So if you find it too low level, let me know. Okay, keep asking questions. There is support for optimistic transactions. So there is this a nice cool feature where whatever you do with Delta Lake, it's usually transactional, meaning that Delta Lake will read table at a given transaction, meaning you know what version your read is from or is based on. So next time you try to commit your optimistic transaction, you basically check what changed since you read this table. And if there are modifications that do not conflict with yours, you should be good to go to commit your transaction. If there are any conflicts, Delta Lake itself will handle them, will retry this commit, and will keep retrying until this commit goes in. That's basically what happens under the covers, and that's what we all love in Delta Lake, because it's just free of charge. It's just part of Delta Lake. So there are these transactional writers. While exploring some code in Apache Spark, I found this very informational, very influential to my understanding of Delta Lake. So all these commands are basically transactional writers. In other words, whatever they do it under this transaction. So in other words, you can execute these commands from different clients at the same time and be assured that these commands, even if they conflict, these conflicts are going to be resolved by Delta Lake, if possible, or Delta Lake will report that, well, your transaction could not be committed, and you will get this information why. That's part of Delta Lake. Okay, there are pragmatic. They probably pragmatic too, but there are programmatic APIs, something that you, developer, Scala or Python, can use to work with Delta Lake. So there are APIs to work with Delta Table or Delta Tables. Via this Delta Table API, you can interact with commands. So if you want to know what exactly is part of this Delta Table API, well, you've got this management interface, and you can just do something like convert to Delta, create if not exist, create or replace, for name, all these SQL-ish or SQL-like commands that now are available for you, Scala or Python developer. So you see a lot of similarities between the names of the corresponding SQL commands. And that's the beauty of Delta Lake, working with Delta Lake. I found myself very often confused by not being able to pick the language I should be using for my Delta Lake development, because for some use cases, SQL is very declarative, very concise and expressive and exactly to my needs. While for some use cases, I find I find SQL a bit constraining or limiting my hopes to develop this or that. So I just switched to Python or better Scala, and I'm good to go. Again, I can just mix and match languages in one single Apache Spark-based application using Delta Lake, SQL, or Python or Scala APIs. That's the beauty of this combo. And that's what I always highlight when I'm presenting Spark or Delta Lake. This variety of APIs and languages supported for people who are new to this environment may be overwhelming and maybe very frustrating what to pick to get the best out of these platforms, Spark and Delta Lake. While for me, for more advanced people, if you feel adventurous, you just pick SQL for one part of your application, while for others, you just start using SQL. Okay, so yeah, so that's what you will see in notebooks, because notebooks, how to say, invite you to mix and match the best out of these platforms, Spark, Delta Lake, and Databricks. Okay, so programmatic and pragmatic APIs for working with commands against Delta table, creating Delta tables, modifying them. Then there is this Delta table builder to create some more advanced applications like generated columns. There is more to it, okay? But we'll get to them, especially after I hear from you, your feedback, how you felt during this presentation, during this day one, what you miss, what you like. Based on your feedback, I can just adjust pace and agenda and just cover what you feel might be most beneficial for you. Okay, so I mentioned it already that there's support. Delta Lake supports structured queries. By structured queries, I mean whatever Spark provides for devs, for data users, data processing users, people who need to process large amounts of data. And we've got support for batch queries as well as for streaming queries. So Delta Lake supports batch reads and batch writes, as well as streaming reads and streaming writes. Exactly what you could expect from something that was developed by the very same people who created Spark Success Streaming. So TD and others, TD, Michael, Burak joined the streaming team later, but he also contributed to Spark Success Streaming. Anyway, these two people, Michael and TD's, perhaps others, they created Spark Success Streaming. Now they are the core team behind Delta Lake. So whatever else could you expect from these people if they've got so much experience with Spark? Well, they made Delta Lake so much Spark aware. Okay, and there's this support for different log stores. I just skip it. There's this information, extra information, how you can find that your logical query plans or your queries work with Delta tables. So from a Spark perspective, Delta tables are nothing else like logical relations over Hadoop FS relations. Okay, so if you are not with this Tahoe file index, this is crucial. So if you are looking at query plans and you want to immediately know whether you are working with Delta or not, with all the cool features, just search for just collect all the logical relations in your query plans, then find all the logical relations over Hadoop FS relation, and then see if these Hadoop FS relations use Tahoe file index. For people who are curious about this Tahoe name included in this file index name, just know that the internal name for Delta Lake was initially Tahoe. This is the, if I'm not mistaken, the biggest lake around. Okay, let me skip this part, but this is just a lake. So at some point they decided to open source this project after checking all the cool features internally. So they decided to rename it from Tahoe to Delta Lake. So you can just find Tahoe in many places reviewing source code. Okay, so yeah, whenever you see Tahoe file index, just know that you are working with Delta Lake in your Spark applications. There is the support for concurrent blind append transactions that cannot conflict with other transactions. Let's skip it because it's very internal, very sophisticated, and I'm not very convinced you might need this information just right today. There is support for generated columns, something that people found very interesting. One of the cool features that the Delta Lake provides. I skip it again as well because I don't feel that you need it just today. There is support for table constraints, and yeah, and now this intro leads you to the nice two features in Delta Lake 1.2. So among these features that came as part of Delta Lake 1.2, I managed to explore and learn a bit about, and they are compacting small files, which is yet another SQL command called optimize. If I'm not mistaken, there is no support for optimize command using this Delta table. And while I'm saying this, I always promise myself to raise a ticket to this open source project and ask them to provide this optimize command as part of this Delta table API. I couldn't find this part of this API. So, well, so regardless of what you think about SQL, if you need to optimize your Delta table, you've got no choice but to stick to this optimize SQL command. And you've got this also nice cool feature, something that's not necessarily user facing. It's called data skipping, and data skipping uses metrics that are collected during writes, and that's why I needed all these transactional writers because they will trigger writing extra metrics that Spark will use. Spark via Delta Lake, or shall I say Delta Lake using Spark infrastructure to optimize your queries. And by what I mean by that is that you can skip scanning some files if you are using filters that do not match data that's part of this or that file. And that's something that they added in 1.2, and they call it data skipping. Something that's not user facing, but except you will get better performance. Yet another reason why you should upgrade to Delta Lake 1.2. Okay, that's enough about overview of the features that I may or may not touch base during this 3-hour technical presentation. Well, 45 minutes past. Oh man, where did this time go by? I can't believe. I'm so stressed, and every time I'm presenting Delta Lake, time flies by so quickly. Okay, so what about installation? So installation is basically very simple if you are using Databricks. So if you are using Databricks platform, Delta is pre-installed, and you've got it as the default format. I've been part of a project recently, and they didn't know that without specifying what format they need, they've been using Delta Lake, something they requested. Can you imagine? So this project, teammates in this project just asked me, "Hey, Jacek, can you convince our leaders to just start using Delta Lake, because we've been hearing so many good stories about Delta Lake. And I said, hey, show me the code. I was independent consultant. Show me the code. And they showed me. And I said, and what's the execution environment? It's Databricks. It's Azure Databricks. And I said, well, so you're lucky because you've already have been using Delta Lake just without asking anybody for this. Just by sticking to this default file format, well, on Databricks, you are using Delta Lake. On vanilla open source Apache Spark installation, you need to do some extra steps, something that requires a couple of things. First, you need to use this Spark SQL extensions property and point it to IO Delta SQL Delta Spark session extension. And I doubt you are going to remember it. You shouldn't, to be honest. Just go to this page and just copy it. So I'll promise I'm gonna keep it updated. If not, let me know. I'll do it right away. So if you are a Scala developer, just like myself, you are going to instantiate your Spark session just like this, Spark session builder, and then you are going to instantiate this Spark session, adding these two new properties. One is extension, another is catalog, Spark catalog. Spark catalog, Spark underscore catalog is the name of the default catalog in Spark. So just by changing configuration of this Spark catalog, you are making Delta to be responsible for all the queries again for tables, lookups, renames, all the lookups, all the table lookups are going to go through this Delta catalog infrastructure. So it's gonna check if this table is perhaps a Delta table. If so, you will get all the cool features. If not, well, your application should just work like it did before without Delta Lake. Okay, and in Spark Shell, and it's just basically two conf properties, again, via this -conf. So even though I showed you how to instantiate Spark session via these two configs, to be honest, you shouldn't be doing it programmatically. You should just use Spark submit with these two configs, and you should be good to go. The reason for this is that sometimes you may need this extension, sometimes you might not, but definitely whatever you can just specify externally to your code will require no recompilation, code recompilation, and that will make DevOps/admin life or users' life easier. Okay, and something that I found quite recently is how to know the version of your Delta table, Delta package installed. I think they added in version 1.1, yeah, 1.1, and or 1.2.0. So if you do this println IO Delta version, that's what I managed to find as the way to know about version installed in your environment. Given that I'm in Python, I'm gonna switch to Scala, and I'll make it a little bit bigger. And yeah, okay, and just execute it. And I'm hoping that I'm get this. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's a very interesting discovery. Honestly, I didn't expect it. Why? Because this server uses the very recent DBR 10.5, which is the latest and greatest of Databricks runtime. So what I did expect was Delta Lake 1.2.1 at the very least, if not something they provide, internally. So seeing 1.1, hey, Danny, we need to talk. Definitely. Okay.
Oh, so, no, it's okay. It just to provide some context. Basically, you probably need to use the beta release of Delta in order for you to have the 1.2.1 because you used the official release. So this is just showcasing how the OSS Delta Lake OSS is actually running on a very different, much faster pace than even Databricks can keep up with that now, which is sort of cool.
Oh yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you for this nice explanation, Danny. Okay,
No
so speaking about about this environment, we know that we are working with 1.1, but know that all these cool features that are part of Delta Lake OSS, open source version of Delta Lake, were already part of Databricks. So just know that even though you are looking at features of Databricks own or internal Delta Lake, all the features that are part of open source version are and have always been, or not perhaps not always, but have long been part of this environment, Databricks. Okay, speaking about Delta Lake. Okay, so the default file formats, I mentioned that this is just Delta. So if you wanna check what's the format, just execute this in Scala. Or if you are SQL user, just set Spark SQL data sources default, and you will see Delta. Okay, nice. Creating Delta table. So yeah, so first of all, you might start very simple, very easy. You may have a very simple way to Delta Lake via your existing Parquet tables. There is this command called SQL command. Not only SQL, there is also Scala and Python support too. So convert to Delta is command that will convert existing Parquet tables. So if you have existing Parquet tables, you can easily convert them to Delta. And again, if you are wondering what's the magic behind this convert to Delta command, it's basically to add this extra directory _delta_log to your directory with your Parquet data sets, and that's it. That's all it is. It's all there is to this convert to Delta command. So what I'm going to do here is to drop this table if exists. Okay, then yeah, there was another presentation where I was adventurous and I wanted to generate a brand new demo table, and you see that now I'm generating it using Python. Again, Python is the default, so just so I'm explicit about this is Python. Okay, so importing functions, and I'm creating 5-row Delta Parquet table by using this data, 5 rows with extra column random number, and I'm just write the format. Again, I know nothing about the audience, so if you are feeling a little a bit uncomfortable hearing something that's very basic for you, I apologize. But given that I know nothing about the audience, I need to say that this is basically Spark, and this is Spark way to create Parquet encoded or Parquet table. Okay, so I'm doing data. This data set is written down or written out as in Parquet format with override, but we know that this table doesn't exist. Also, this override basically does nothing, and we save it as table. So this table is going to be registered to Hive-like metastore, where we can just see what this table represents. So let me execute it. It ran successfully the last time I executed it. So I'm hoping that nothing bad will happen here. And honestly, for all this, sorry to say it, sorry for exaggerating a little bit, for all the hate and love I have towards this Databricks platform. Again, I'm not UI user. I love Shell, Linux, and sticking to command line and Scala. I really like using notebooks for presentations because I've got this versioned. Thanks to Databricks, I can version it to via this repos feature in my GitHub repo. And I've got all the cells, all the column, something that I can just import right away and have this Spark environment, Spark-aware, Spark-enabled environment of Databricks available and available and ready to happily execute my cells, my code. Something that I found really hard in other environments, even when I was using IntelliJ IDEA for presentations, it was not as simple. Teach me, teach me how to do this outside Databricks if you feel that Databricks does not give features that you found interesting in other platforms, for example, IntelliJ IDEA. Okay, so I executed. So now I'm gonna use SQL. So you see, this is the very best feature of Databricks. I can switch between languages whenever I feel more comfortable with one language like SQL or Python. I simply mark a cell just by using this magic, and I'm ready to go. So SQL this time. Show tables like demo table. And you can see that I just created this demo table. It's not temporary. And again, this is just pure Apache Spark command, well, Spark SQL command, nothing to do with Delta Lake. As a matter of fact, it's not even a Delta table. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you what sits or what's inside this table. So select start from demo table. Again, if you feel uncomfortable seeing something that's very obvious for you, I apologize. Again, know nothing about the audience, so I need to do this assumption that my audience knows nothing about SQL, Databricks, and all the stuff that you consider basics. Sorry. Okay, so this is the table that I saved. If you are wondering why these IDs are not sorted, well, we are in distributed environment where sorting is pretty heavy. So unless you need it badly, you shouldn't be doing ordering. It's often overkill for what you need. So can we do desk extended? Yeah, why not? And what is desk extended? Describe extended is SQL way to ask for table metadata, and it's supported by Spark SQL again. And again, it has nothing to do with with Delta Lake. I was thinking about Parquet because I wanted to mention Parquet, and I said Smart Parquet.
Hey,
so,
sorry,
yep.
Sorry to chime in, Jacek. We've got about 2 minutes left, so why don't we just make sure we wrap it up so that way we can.
Yeah. Okay. So you can just yeah. Thank you for reminding me that time flies by so quickly while presenting something so cool like Delta Lake. Okay, so you can just see this table. This is just basically a directory on your file system, and you see success, committed, all the directories as well as files. Okay, and these files are Parquet files. Now, why am I showing you this? Because I need to show you that the only difference between these 9 rows that represent a Parquet table will see extra row for directory. That's the only part that make your Parquet table Delta Lake aware. So I'm going to use convert to Delta command, and I'm going to do this on this demo table. So the only change I am introducing via this convert to Delta SQL command is that rather than seeing 9 rows after I list files under this directory, you will see 10 or 11. You will see, we'll see in a moment. So it's okay. It took just 15 seconds. And let's describe extended first. So we now learn that this is Delta table. You see, previously it was Parquet. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to see how many files I end up with for this previously Parquet, now Delta Lake table. So 10 rows. So what's the difference? If you start comparing these directories, these listings, sorry, this one against what I just listed, you will see this directory. This is the distinction, the main, the game changer, as you used to say. what makes this directory Delta Lake table. And I think we can stop here. I could just talk and talk, about what's inside, but we got 2 more hours, so I'll stop here and let Danny close the show. Thank you, Danny.
Thanks very much. No, thank you very much. Hey, thank you very much for the time. I did my best to answer all the questions that came on in. So please join us on the Delta user Slack between now and the next session, which is on the 31st of May, where Jacek is going to go ahead and do the second session. And so, like I said before, join us on Delta user Slack in the interim. Jacek, I want to thank you very much for this fun session.
Thank you. Pleasure is all mine, definitely.
All right. Looking forward to seeing you all on the 31st. There we go. I'll remember the date eventually.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Ciao. Bye.